For 30 years, Anthony Ray Hinton was a dead man walking.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord.
Prosecution seemed deemed to take my life from me.
58 years old, Hinton lived more than half his life inside a cage, Holman Correctional Facility in southern Alabama. Today, he's seeing and experiencing things for the first time in decades.
Oh my goodness. So this is the past.
He is welcomed home, a party in his honor, hosted by the Equal Justice Initiative, led by attorney Brian Stevenson and his team of attorneys who fought for decades to win Hinton's freedom.
Thank you for giving me my life back. Just being here as a team, you can say that you got an innocent man off death row.
His nightmare began in 1985. Ronald Reagan was president, Back to the Future was a box office hit, and under the cover of darkness, 2 Birmingham restaurant managers were shot dead at closing time, just months apart. A third victim, another man who survived the shooting and helped identify 29-year-old Anthony Ray Hinton as the killer.
You're a free man now. What does that mean to you?
I mean everything. I mean, you never think about your freedom until it's taken away from you. You couldn't put a price tag on it. They got my $12 back already.
So much about the world has changed, but the greatest still is a world without his mother. She died while he was locked away.
It can't get no lower for me. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it. That's what's the love of my life.
He goes back to the home they shared together, now abandoned.
Kind of hate to see it in this shape.
It's his first time there since the night it was all taken away. This is the room where Hinton's mother kept her .38 caliber revolver. Police said it was the murder weapon. Hinton's court-appointed public defender hired a supposed ballistics expert to dispute the prosecution's claim about the murder weapon. A persuasive expert, he was not.
So his ballistics expert was blind.
In one eye, yes, that's correct.
He had to ask how to turn on the machine. He couldn't see it. He had to ask somebody, please help me. So when he put him on the stand as my witness, they crucified him. I said, they're gonna find me guilty.
Hinton was sentenced to death. He was ordered to spend the remainder of his life in prison, living inside a 5-by-7 cell.
Pretty much sleep in a fetal position because your feet hang over the bed. You only have a bed that is mounted to the wall and a toilet. And that's what I lived in for 30 years. They took my 30s, my 40, my 50, but what they couldn't take was my joy. I couldn't do a thing about the years, but I could control my joy.
53 inmates were executed at Holman while Hinton was on death row.
My darkest memory would be seeing so many people that I got to know be executed.
He languished in prison for years before his case reached appeals court.
I had never been so convinced of someone's innocence than I had in Mr. Hinton's case. No one asked them.
Judge Sue Bell Cobb was one of those appellate court judges who believed his story.
There was no incriminating evidence. He didn't have anything from the robbery. There were no fingerprints.
This is extremely unusual.
His appeal was denied, but his team kept fighting.
We'd exhausted every state court appeal, and it was the United States Supreme Court that finally intervened.
The result was a new trial the Ray Hinton had been waiting for. But just a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama dropped the case after a new look at the evidence could not match the bullets to the gun, and Hinton was released.
Since I've been locked up for 30 years and finances is tight, $5 a slice.
I don't sense any bitterness. Why is that?
Bitterness kills the soul. I cannot hate because my Bible teaches me not to hate. I've seen hate at its worst. What would it profit me to hate? I want you to know there is a God. He sits high, but he looks low. He will destroy, but yet he will defend. And he defends me. Thank you.
Let me start off by saying how fitting it is to be in Seattle. You didn't disappoint me in the rain. But 29 years ago, I tried out for the Seattle Mariners and was told to come back, for I was a great baseball player. All through high school, my batting average was 618 a season. I made All-Star every year, and I had hoped to make it to the pros, but then hell opened its doors. 30 years of pure hell I lived in because 8 racist white men had the power, the means, and the motive to put me in a 5x7. Those 8 white men had every intention of executing me for a crime they knew that I didn't commit. I truly wish that I could look you in the eye and tell you that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. I wish I could look you in the eye and tell you race had nothing to do with it. But the state of Alabama didn't make an honest mistake, and race had everything to do with it. I have to ask myself what type of justice system we have in this country that we can put a man in a hole for 30 years simply because of the color of his skin, and because the only thing that the state of Alabama said linked me to the murder was a gun, ballistics. You as citizens should ask yourself, how is it that it would take 30 years to determine whether something match or don't match? 30 years. You wake up one morning in July, and I don't know, have any of you ever had the pleasure of being in Alabama in July? But I'm finna tell you something, this is the truth. You don't want to come to Alabama in July, it's too hot. And so this hot day, I woke up like any other morning, and about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, my mother was in the kitchen, and I went in to get a glass of her lemonade. And as I was pouring this lemonade, my mother asked me, was I going to revival that night? And I said, yes, ma'am. For in the South, no matter how old you get, you say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. Yes, sir, and no, sir, out of pure respect for your elders. And so I said, yes, ma'am, I'm going. And I got this glass of lemonade and went outside. About 15 minutes later, I brought the glass back inside, and there my mother was again in the kitchen. She said, what time revival start tonight? And I said, 7 o'clock, Mama. And she looked at her watch and she said, well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass. I gave my mother this baby look, and it usually worked, but it didn't work this day. And I looked at my mother and I said, Mama, I promise you, tomorrow I will cut that grass. My mother looked at me and she said, I'm trying my best to see how that you'll cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass. And she gave me that look that only she could give me, and she finally said, boy, you better get out there and cut that grass. And I goes outside and I fire up the lawnmower, and 25 minutes into cutting the grass, I just happened to look up. And there stood 2 white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, can I help you? One of the gentlemen said, yes, we are detective from Birmingham Police Department. We're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton. I said, that would be me again. How can I help you? He said, we have a warrant for your arrest. And I said, for what? He said, we will explain that to you later, but right now we want you to put your hands behind your back. I complied. I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me and proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, hold up. At least allow me the chance to go in and tell my mother that I'm being arrested for something. The detective said, we can't let you go back in the house. And we argued for about 2 minutes. And finally, the other detective said, let him go in and tell his mother he'd been arrested. And I go in and I just show my mother the handcuff, and like any good mother, she began to scream and holler, what are those handcuffs doing on my baby? One of the detectives said, take him outside while I stay in here and talk to his mother. A few minutes later, he comes outside and we proceeded to go to the county jail. He turned around and he said, Anthony, do you own a firearm? I said, no. He said, do your mother own a firearm? I said, yes, and told him what kind. Every day, anyone that meets me that are aware of this case, they ask me one question. Why did you tell the police about a gun they had no knowledge of? And I tell them that all of my life, my mother have always told me, if you haven't done anything, you have no reason to lie. If you haven't done anything, you have no business running. That day, I told the truth. They dropped me off at a substation. They turn around and go back to my mother's house and talk to her, and she gives them the gun. They take the gun, they come pick me up, and we proceeded to go to the county jail again. I asked these detectives at least 50 times, why am I being arrested? And they never would respond. And as they drove a little farther, I said, detective, why are y'all arresting me? And this seemed to set the detective off. He turned around, he looked at me and he said, you really want to know why we're arresting you? I said, yes. He said, we're charging you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree attempted murder. I said, oh, you got the wrong guy. He said, let me tell you something and let me tell it to you right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I'm going to make sure you found guilty of it. I said, for a crime that I didn't commit. He said, you must have a hidden problem. Because I just told you, I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it. He said, but you remember this if you remember nothing else. I am going to make sure that you found guilty of it. We drove a little farther and he turned around and he said, and by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you. Would you like to know what they are? And I said, yes. He said, number 1, you black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him. Whether you shot him or not, I don't care. He said, number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury. He said, do you know what that spells? And he looked at me and he said, conviction, 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 conviction. And as we got to the police station, they put me in this holding cell for about 2.5 hours. And finally the detective came in and I said, detective, can you please tell me the date and the time that these crimes took place? He goes through his notes and he tells me the date and the time, and I replied, detective, if you're telling me the truth, couldn't have been me, for I was at work at that particular date and that particular time. And I said, thank God. I said, thank you, Jesus. My supervisor happened to be white. Here's his phone number. Here's the address where I work at. You can go out and check. And he left. About 4.5 hours later, he came back in and he said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder. Your alibi checks out. He said, but now the bad news. We have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. I said, but Detective, I haven't killed anyone. He said, didn't you remember what I told you on the way here? I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it. He said, that still is in effect. He looked at me and he said, and by the way, I truly believe you didn't do it. He said, but since y'all is always taking up for one another, take this rap for your homeboy. With tears down my eyes and running down my cheeks, I looked at this detective and I said, Detective, I don't have a homeboy in this world that I would take this rap for. I goes before a judge read me my rights and tell me what I've been charged with. He tells me and asks me, do you have an attorney? And I said, no. He said, can you afford an attorney? And I said, no. He looks back in his courtroom and he called this attorney up front and tells this attorney that he wants him to represent me on 2 counts of capital murder. Without even asking me my name, the attorney looked at me and he said, I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. I looked at this attorney and I said, would it make a difference to you if I told you that I was innocent? The attorney looked at me and he said, the problem with that statement is that all y'all always doing something and then saying you didn't do it. This is the attorney that I had to go and believe that was going to represent me to the best of his knowledge. I sit in jail a year and a half before I go to trial. In that year and a half, I've seen this attorney maybe twice. I go to trial, and my trial lasted for about 3 weeks. The jury come back with a guilty verdict. The judge proudly stand up and say, Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty on 2 counts of capital murder. And it is the order of this court that I sentence you to death. And that judge had the audacity to say, may God have mercy on your soul. The prosecution ran out that day and told the media that today the state of Alabama got the worst killer that ever walked the streets, off the streets that day. Only it wasn't true. And on December the 17th, 1986, I was transported to death row in Atmore, Alabama. Once arriving at Atmore, Alabama for the next 3 years, I did not say a word to another human being for 3 years. I went into this dark place, this place where I didn't even think that I could go myself. I went into this place where I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to hear about anyone. And that was my refuge, this dark place. For 3 years, every time the guard would ask me a question, I would take a pen or a pencil and write my response, but never would I speak. Going into the 4th year, I woke up approximately at 1 a.m. to the sound of a grown man crying, a man that I had lived by for 3 years and never asked him his name or where he was from. I wasn't there to get to know anyone. I wasn't there to befriend anyone. All I know, I was there for something I didn't do. But at an early age, my mother taught me compassion. My mother taught me no matter what one does in life, he or she still deserves compassion. And it was that compassion that I hollered through this brick wall and I asked this gentleman, was he okay? Took this man a while to respond, but finally he said, I just got worried my mother passed. I told him I was sorry to hear that. And I said, if anyone going to argue your case, your mother will argue your case before God. I told him a corny joke, and we both kind of laughed a little bit, and I laid back down. And at 6 a.m., I woke up and I realized that my voice and my sense of humor was back. I tell people every day that I was born with two things, there's nothing else in this world. I was born to a mother who loved me unconditionally. And I was born with a sense of humor. I'm just a big old country boy that no matter how beautiful you are, no matter how young you are, old you are, if you walk in there, I just happen to see you stumble and fall, I would be the first one to run and help you up. I would be the first one to ask you, are you okay? But the moment you tell me you're okay, I'm going to laugh at you for falling. I just believe that laughter is good for the soul. And that morning, I woke up and realized my sense of humor was back. The state of Alabama was in the process of executing 4 men, and they had already executed 2. And I called this guard up to my cell and I said, officer, is there anything you can give me so I won't have to smell that flesh burning? The officer looked at me and he said, no, there's nothing I can give you. But this is a consolation to you. One day, you'll get used to it. And he looked at me and he said, and by the way, one day somebody will smell your flesh burning. And it was at that moment that I sit back down on this bunk bed that was too small. And I told my body that the mind had to leave. In 30 years, I witnessed 54 men walk by my cell only to be executed. 5 men had decided that they no longer could take it. They hung themselves, and 3 other men decided that they would slash their wrists and bleed out. And I kept saying, how long can I survive this madness? How long will it be before they come and get me? But in the meantime, until that time come, all I knew that I had to somehow appear, escape. And as I sit on that bunk bed, I looked at my body and I said, body and mind have to leave. And it was as though my body was talking back to me and said, do you promise to come back? And I said, yes. And as soon as my body gave me permission to leave, I left. Of all the places in the world to go, for whatever reason, I wanted to go see Queen Elizabeth. Please, don't ask me why a 29-year-old black male wanted to go see Queen Elizabeth. I don't know. But that's who I wanted to see. And in my mind, I visualized and showing up at the palace. I told the guard that I was there to see the Queen. They goes in and they tell the Queen. She invited me in and we sit down and we talked about Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harris, and of course the tragedy of Lady Prince Di. About 30 minutes into this conversation, the Queen realized that she hadn't offered me anything to drink, and she finally looked at me and she said, Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea? And I told her I would love some tea. And she said, what would you like in your tea? And I told her some lemon. She told the butler to go out and bring me some lemon, and I put the lemon in my tea and we continued to talk. And I finally stand up and tell the Queen, I must be leaving. Now that I can go wherever I want in my mind, I didn't stop there. I decided that I would do something that I said I would never do. I decided that I would get married. And as a young boy, I said I would never get married. But I decided that I would marry the talented and beautiful actress, Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married up here for 15 long, beautiful years. And if there's a such thing as a perfect wife, Halle Berry was the perfect wife. She always said, yes, dear, and it's okay, dear. And what I love most about her, she didn't spend any money. And then the God was there calling me, and he said, Anthony, I've been calling you for 10 minutes. Where you was? I said, I was gone. He said, Anthony, you have a legal visit. I said, I don't have an attorney because the state of Alabama don't point you an attorney during post-conviction. He said, Anthony, well, somebody is out there pretending to be a lawyer. Why don't you get dressed and go see who it is? I get dressed and I go out there, and there's this lawyer from Boston. I asked this lawyer who sent him. He told me a man by the name of Brian Stevenson of Equal Justice Initiative. I asked this lawyer, who is Brian Stevenson and who is Equal Justice Initiative, and he began to tell me. He told me how great this Mr. Brian Stevenson is. And I looked at this lawyer and I said, you keep telling me how good and how great Brian Stevenson is, but he can't be that good. I said, because he have already made one fundamental mistake. And he said, what would that be? I said, did you not say you from Boston? He said, yes. I said, well, had this great Mr. Brian Stevenson contact me first, he would have known that I am a beloved Yankee fan. And there's no way a Yankee fan and a Boston fan could ever work together. I said, but for your sake, I'm willing to put my personal feeling aside and let you work on my case. And for the next 3 years, this lawyer worked on my case, came back every year to tell me what he was doing, what he was trying to do. And then going into the 4th year, he said, Anthony, I really believe I can get you a life without parole. And I said, get who a life without parole? And he said, I can get you. I said, life without parole is for guilty people, not innocent people. I said, I told you that I am innocent. I said, you want me to stand up and say that I did something when I didn't in order to save my life. I said, I could never stand up and tell that lie. I said, if the state of Alabama is hell-bent on executing me for a crime they know that I didn't commit, so be it. I said, at some point in some time, all of us must die. I said, but I don't want to die, and I definitely don't want to die for something that I didn't do. I said, but I would never stand up and say I did something when I didn't do it. I said, I'm going to tell you something that my mother told me when I was 12 years old. My mother called me and she said, if you man enough to bend down and pick up a rock, and if you man enough to throw that rock, you should be man enough to say you throw that rock. I said, this is one rock I didn't throw. Therefore, I could never stand up and say I throwed this rock when I didn't. I said, and since you don't believe in me, I have no choice but to fire you. He looked and he said, are you serious? I said, yes. I said, I need a lawyer that believes in me, but more important, I need a lawyer that is willing to go to jail for me if necessary. I said, but I really truly thank you for what you've done and what you was trying to do. I said, and after today, you no longer represent me. And as he was going out the front door and they were taking me back toward my cell, something in my mind said, you got to be the dumbest person in the world. You fired the only lawyer that you had. And just as that thought entered my mind, another thought said, you did the right thing. Always stand up for what you believe in. Always stand up for principle. And as I got closer to my cell, the guard was watching TV, and I asked this guard, what was he watching? He said, I'm watching Brian Stevenson. And I said, oh, that's the man. I said, you mind if I stand here and listen at him a moment? He said, sure. Brian Stevenson was talking about why we don't need a death penalty in this country. And for whatever reason, I knew at that moment, this is the man that I needed to represent me. Later that night, I wrote Mr. Stevenson a letter thanking him for sending the lawyer. And I told Mr. Stevenson that I would like for him to become my lawyer. I said, but before you say yes or no, all I ask is that you read my transcript. I said, once you read my transcript, if you find one thing in my transcript that points to my guilt, do not worry about becoming my lawyer. Do not worry about sending me a lawyer. I am perfectly willing to die for something that I know I didn't do and the state of Alabama know I didn't do. About 3 months later, I get a reply from Mr. Stevenson saying he would read my transcript. 5 months later, I get a letter saying that he had made arrangement to come to death row to see me. I cannot explain it, but the moment I shook this man's hand, I knew that God had sent me his best lawyer. And as we sit there, we talked about our childhood. And finally, we got into the case. I said, Mr. Stevenson, if no two guns is alike, the state of Alabama is lying, and I know they lying. If no two guns is alike, those bullets couldn't match. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to do me a favor. He looked at me and he said, what is the favor? I said, I need you to hire a qualified ballistic expert. I said, Mr. Stevenson, all of my life I lived in the South. I don't want you to hire just any qualified expert. But I need this qualified expert to be a white Southern, and he must be a male. I said, Mr. Stevenson, you can go out and find the best white female in the country. Her word is no good on the witness stand in the state of Alabama. I said, and it definitely cannot be a person of color. I said, Mr. Stevenson, it have to be a white Southern male. The state of Alabama only recognized one of their own. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need this white man to be the best of the best. I need him to believe in the death penalty, but above all of that, I need him to just tell the truth. Mr. Stevenson left that day and told me that he would try and find this particular expert. About 6 months later, I get a call and say, call your attorney. He tells me that he found 3 of the world-renowned noun experts. 2 of them live in Texas and 1 of them live in Virginia. He said, they are the best of the best. He said, but I need to inform you that these 3 men only testify for the prosecution. They have never testified for the defense. He said, in other words, what I'm trying to tell you, these men put me on death row. They have never testified to get one off. I said, Mr. Stevenson, did you remember to ask them, would they just tell the truth? And he said, they would tell exactly what the evidence say. I said, if you can afford it, hire those 3 men. I can't tell you the date that they came to Alabama, but they came on 3 separate occasions. Every one of them did their own testing, and they came to the conclusion that the bullets that the state of Alabama said match, indeed did not match. They even did something that I didn't know they was trying to do. They even tried to make the gun match, and they still couldn't make it match. We get this new evidence, and we go to the Attorney General, a man by the name of Bill Pryor. Asked him to re-examine the bullets, and he was quoted as saying, it would be a waste of the taxpayer money. It would be a waste of my time to take 1 hour to re-examine those bullets. And for not doing his job, George W. Bush appointed him to a federal lifetime appointment. Once he leave office, another attorney general take over, and he too refused to take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets. He lose in the next election, and a man by the name of Luther Strange, we go to him, and he too refused to take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets. I sit on Alabama death row an extra 16 years. And while sitting there, I lost the love of my life, my mother. And I told Mr. Stevenson, once I found out that my mother had passed, I told Mr. Stevenson I didn't give a damn about that case. If the state of Alabama wanted to hang me, they could do it today. If the state of Alabama wanted to execute me, they can do it today. I don't care no more. I didn't see me being in the world without my mother. And I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say thank you. And as I tried to lay down that night, it was as though my mother came in my cell and stayed in my ear all night telling me that she didn't bring me up to be a quitter. I could hear my mother telling me, I've always taught you to fight. My mother had been my biggest cheerleader all of my life. When I did good, she was there to cheer me on, and when I did bad, she was there to say, you'll get them next time. And early that morning, I called Mr. Stevens and apologized, and I told him that I wanted him to give the state of Alabama as much hell as he possibly could. We went before 14 judges in Alabama, and they all refused to do the right thing. And finally, Mr. Stevenson said, I need to take your case to the United States Supreme Court. He said, but I need to inform you that if the United States Supreme Court rule against you, in 2 years, the state of Alabama will execute you. I looked at Mr. Stevenson and I said, take my case to the United States Supreme Court. 2 years after filing my case to the United States Supreme Court, they did something that they have never done in the history of the courts. All 9 judges ruled in my favor. They sent the case back to Alabama. We go before a trial judge. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with deep sadness that we have to inform this court that we have lost the gun in question. The judge give them time to relocate the gun. She set a court date. We go back. They comes in and they say, Your Honor, it was great pleasure that we informed the court that we found the gun, but it is with sadness that we have to inform the court again. Now we have lost the bullets that goes to the gun. And all this time I'm sitting in jail thinking that the prosecutor had lost the bullets, but he had his own expert re-examining the bullets. The man that said that the bullets matched 30 years ago was called back to X to re-examine. Only this time, he examined the bullets and he informed the prosecutor that the bullets do not match the way they matched 30 years ago. But the bullets match exactly the same that they did 30 years ago. Bullets are like fingerprint, they don't change. My life was not worth them telling the truth. 30 years ago, I didn't have the lawyer that I had in 2005. Now the state of Alabama cannot no longer tell a lie. Not only did I have a better lawyer, but I had 3 of the world-renowned experts who was waiting to debate the state. The expert even challenged the state expert, come and show us how you got this match. The expert in Alabama refused. 30 years of pure hell. All because the color of my skin. The state of Alabama had every intention of executing an innocent man. And had it not been for Brian Stevenson, I wouldn't be here today. Had it not been for those experts that was willing to tell the truth, I wouldn't be here today. The state of Alabama was seeking justice and the highest justice that they could, and that would be to execute me. Tomorrow will be 3 years that I've been free. And to this day, no one have had the decency to say, Mr. Hinton, we're sorry. Have they not apologized because I was born a person of color? Every day I go in my mind, I try to find out why nobody have had the decency to say I'm sorry. The state of Alabama was seeking justice. And I've come to Seattle to ask you one profound question. Where is my justice? Where do I get justice from? Better yet, who do I get justice from? All of you perhaps think that the justice system is blind. That is exactly what they want you to believe, that the justice system is blind. Every now and then they will show you this lady with a mask over her face, and you see this blindfold. But she knows exactly what race you are. She knows exactly what gender you are. She knows exactly what college you went to. She knows exactly what neighborhood you live in. She knows exactly something that perhaps all of us don't want her to know. She knows exactly how much money you have in the bank. And she put all of those things together. And when you find yourself in her courtroom, it have already been determined whether you're going to be found guilty or not guilty. We have two sets of justice in this world. For those of you who have been fortunate enough to have money, inherit money, or however you got it, you have the ability to buy justice. For those of us who play fair and don't have anything, we are the one that is filling up the prison because we cannot afford a decent defense. There is over 2 million men and women incarcerated in this country. That is more people than in some third world country. And some of them are there simply because of the color of their skin. And there's those that are there because they didn't have the money to hire a decent defense. I ask you, where is my justice? I ask you, what would you do if they came for you? What would you do if you were charged with a crime you know you didn't commit? What would you do if you didn't have the money to pay for a defense? What would you do if you took a polygraph test and passed, but yet no one believed at you? What would you do if the judicial system looked at you more for the color of your skin than the merits of your case? What would you do if you was sentenced to death? What would you do if you had to spend the rest of your life in a cell the size of your bathroom? What would you do if you've been waiting all your life to die for a crime you didn't commit? How would you survive? What would you do? After 30 years, they finally set you free. Now, who would you be? What would you do? That book is the second greatest book that ever been written. I know because I know the author of that book. I know that that book will touch you in some way. That book put the legal system on trial. That book put you on trial if you is one that believe in the death penalty. That book will ask you to look at their name and see, can you tell who is innocent, who is guilty? Because my name was once on that list. And as you read this book, I want you to put your name on that list. And after every 10 names, say innocent. Every day in this country, the government kills in your name. It don't matter that you live in Seattle, you are still responsible for the government in Alabama. And no matter how you go home and wash your hand and put on this good smelling soap or whatever, that innocent blood is still on your hand. Because we as citizens, we sit by and we say nothing, we do nothing. We allow the government to do as they please, and they would have you to believe that they are doing the right thing. I was the 152nd exoneree that had got off death row. How many men and women need to be exonerated before we, as a country, decide that enough is enough, we don't need no death penalty? Because once we execute someone that is innocent, and once we find out that they truly was innocent, there is no coming back. I am a true believer that what affects me today could very well affect you tomorrow. Ask yourself, I could have been your father, your brother. I could have been your best friend. Ask yourself, how would you feel if the system that you know would take your father, someone you love, someone you care about, and put them in a hole for 30 years and have every intention of executing them simply because they didn't have the money, simply because they was born of a different skin tone? Ask yourself, how would you feel? Because I've had people that come up to me and say, Mr. Hinton, I'm truly sorry for what happened to you. But isn't that the price we pay for having law and order? And I look at those people that tells me that. You have a right to your opinion, but I would like to ask you to be honest with me. Would you feel that way if I had been your brother, if I had been your father, if I had been your grandfather, if I had been someone that you truly love and care about? Would you feel that is the price that we pay? The system is badly broken. I'm at an age where it won't affect me much longer, but I worry about you young people. You must ask yourself what type of legal system you want to inherit, and better yet, what type of system you want your children to inherit. If you're satisfied, then let it stay the way it is. If you're not satisfied, I often tell people I don't believe in marching in the streets. I believe in marching to the ballot box, and I believe in voting. And I believe in voting the way that we need to vote. I do not vote on racist line. I do not vote on gender. I do my homework. I ask the tough question. And if a politician would have you to believe that you're more safe by having a death penalty, that politician is lying to you. Statistics shows that states that don't have a death penalty, murder rate is far less than states that have a death penalty. I hope that once you read this book, it will change your heart. It will teach you about forgiveness. In this book, if you read nothing else, read about a man that I became friend with that was a KK member, a man that had went out in the street and hung a young black man in the middle of the streets. And everybody was looking at this man because he had 3 K's in front of his name, and I erased those 3 K's. All of this man's life, from the day he was in his mother's womb, his mother, his daddy taught him to hate. His community taught him to hate. And I asked the profound question, Where was Child Protective Service when this young boy was being taught to hate? Where was this village that we often say it takes a village to raise a child? Where was this village when this young man was being taught to hate? I didn't hear from the village until it was time for him to be tried and convicted. And this village sentenced him to death. And when he came to death row, just as he was taught to hate, I, along with other blacks, taught him how to love. And on the night of his execution, they asked you two things. What would you like for your final meal? And do you have anything you would like to say? I am proud to stand here and say that my friend, Henry Francis Hayes, left this world saying that all of my life, my mother and father, my community taught me to hate. But the very people they taught me to hate are the people that taught me how to love. And Henry Hayes' final words was, "And this night, I leave this world, now knowing what true love feels like." Just as someone teaches you something, someone can teach you another thing. Today, I hope that I have said something that will make you go home and think about a corrupt system that at some point in some time you will come face to face with. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my story.
Thank you for coming in and telling your story today. And I wondered, now that you've gone through this and now that you understand how the legal system has failed you here, do you have thoughts or advice about how we can prevent the legal system from continuing to do this and to shine more transparency on the cases? Like, for instance, when you said repeatedly that that the state would not look at your case, spend an hour looking at your case, and is there something that could bring transparency to that type of that type of failure for justice?
Well, let me first say that as long as we have a death penalty in this country, whether it's through human error, through pure racism, whatever, we're going to continue to execute innocent people. The only way we will never execute innocent people is that we don't have a death penalty in the first place. But during my years on death row, when we went to the Attorney General and asked for him to re-examine the evidence, there is no law that governs them to re-examine the evidence. I think we need to have a law placed in every state that when there is question of evidence, they should be made to go back and recheck the evidence, and if you still disagree, someone as an independent should come in and settle this dispute. There's no reason your tax dollar should been wasted on me for 30 years when we could have resolved this. But as long as the United States Supreme Court have given something that perhaps none of you know, the United States Supreme Court have given prosecutors a blank check. They can't be sued. They can get up there and lie. They can get up there and fabricate evidence, and you can prove that they did it, but you then can't turn around and sue them. But here's the kicker. If you get up there and lie for anyone and they prove later that you lied, the prosecution can charge you with perjury. I just believe that all of us should be up under the same rules and regulations. If you can be charged with perjury, why shouldn't the prosecutor be charged with the same thing? We need to study and make our laws better and equal for everybody. And I just think that these types of problems won't occur. But as long as we have the system the way it is, and we've been led to believe that the state have the right they are the one who have to prove whether you did something or don't believe that. You the one have to prove that you didn't do it. And if you don't have the money to prove it, chances are you won't prove it. And I just think we need better laws to put on the book to force the prosecutor to re-examine the evidence. We need to outlaw the fact that they can't be sued, because what prosecutor won't go out there and just tell lies to get a conviction? His motive is to get as many convictions he can, and then he wants to be up for judgeship, and he wants to be able to say, I sent more men to Alabama death row, I sent more men and women to prison than any other judge. But what he don't tell you, most of them was fabricated, most of it was lies and built off lies. And I just think that is unfair that you can be charged for lying and he can't. That's a double standard, and I'm against that.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.